You are probably knee-deep, let's be real, underwater in individual planning meetings right now with your students and probably parents too, and you're talking about what's to come after high school. We put this pressure on ourselves as high school counselors to have all of the answers, or at least I know that I did when I was starting out. Like someone asks you a very specific question about a very specific college that they don't know what college it is, and they're looking for this needle in a haystack, and you imagine that they want you just to know what that college is. Your student wants to know what college in the country is best known for their equine therapy undergrad degree or their sustainability certificate that could be added onto their dual architecture and interior design majors. Like, that's insane that some of you think that you have to have that filed all the way back in your brain. Most of us don't have that readily accessible in our brain for us. Today, I'm talking with Sam Bernstein, the founder of a free college search app called Loper. Though he's not a counselor, I feel like he could be our biggest hype man. He's made the connection between what students need to feel engaged and excited about the college search process because it can be really overwhelming. And he really does believe that it can be more enjoyable if it's a fun self-discovery process. One of the best parts about Loper is that it allows counselors to have real conversations with students because that's where we get to shine, right? Not the research, not the paperwork, the conversations and the relationships. It's what we love to do best. You're going to hear us talk a little bit about AI and technology, gamification, and overall just making the college search process actually fun. He's trying to solve these problems with Loper, and he tells us about how students can best use the app and then the benefits that you'll reap as a counselor because of it. So let me introduce you to Sam, and we'll get right into our conversation about the college search process and Loper. Sam is the co-founder of Loper, a free mobile app designed to help students explore and discover their best educational opportunities after high school. The inspiration for Loper came out of the pandemic, where life on pause led two college friends, Sam and his co-founder Eric, to spending long nights discussing their shared passion, education. Fast forward 2 years, and they quit their jobs to launch Loper, which has now helped nearly 200,000 students find best fit opportunities after high school. Let's get to this interview with Sam. You got into this profession to make a difference in your students' lives, but you're spread thin by all of the things that keep getting added to your to-do list. I can't create more hours in the day, but I can invite you into my Counselor Click, where you'll finally catch your breath. Come with me as we unpack creative ideas and effective strategies that'll help you be the counselor who leaves a lifelong impact on your students. I'm Lauren Tingle, your high school counseling hype girl, here to help you energize your school counseling program and remind you of how much you love your job. Hey, Sam, I'm excited to welcome you onto the podcast to talk about college searching and that whole process because I know counselors are always looking for tools to help with that, and it's something that we spend a lot of time doing with our high school students. So welcome to the podcast.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me, Lauren.
Okay, you are passionate about education and technology, which is a really cool intersection for us as high school counselors because we get to benefit from what you have put together. And so I kind of am interested in hearing how this process has evolved for you. Like, you're not a counselor, that's not your background, but how are you serving counselors, especially searching for colleges with their students by this evolving technology, the app that you have?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And appreciate the question. You're totally right to call out that I'm not a counselor. And, my co-founder and I, when we started Loper, we really got in this from the student lens where students just have so many options right now. And it's how do you narrow that down? And what jumped out to us is that technology has an opportunity to really make things fun for students. And that was the first piece. And we, maybe our controversial belief is that engagement can be better than depth, especially in the early days of this process where it's just so overwhelming. It's like, how do you get someone to take that first step? Sometimes it can be as easy as something that's actually fun to spend 5 or 10 minutes on. And I think if you rewind the clock for us, where we're not so far removed from the college process, but maybe a decade ago, I would have a really hard time saying that much about college was fun for me in high school. And all of those other feelings, I think, really complicate a process that should be so exciting. And so that was a student lens that we approached with. But Eric and I were both very cognizant. We are not counselors. We are not counselors. Never sat a day in an educator's seat. And I think when we learned from going out and interviewing counselors when starting Loper, and I say learned, maybe reminded is a better word, is that counselor secret sauce is that they're just so amazing with people. And think technology sometimes has this connotation that it's going to automate everything away with the role. And I think now more than ever, that's a fear people have. But you can't automate everything when it comes down to people and their lives and their dreams and their hopes. And so I think with counselors, there's a few pieces of technology that really excites me, where there's automating workflows. How can we just take someone who has too much on their plate and simplify it and strip it down?
Amen.
Yeah, it shocks me sometimes when I've sat down with counselors and like, okay, actually walking through your day, I'm like, wait a second, but when you do actually all the work that you're supposed to do, it's like, oh, okay, got it. This is this is
It
not
doesn't stop.
sustainable. It does not stop. And then the other piece is there, technology can complement counselors' messaging. There's only so many ways that you can say as a person. There's only so many people that you can reach in one-on-one conversations. How can we expand breadth? Just like it can expand breadth, it can also expand depth that you otherwise might not be able to get to. You might have 1, 2 15-minute conversations with a student in a year. There's only so much. How can we make those as impactful as possible? And then again, add to that messaging. And then it really just ends up going back to engaging the student for us at the end of the day, where the counselors I talk to and the ones that I think are best at their job, it all ends up coming back to what's best for the student. How can it get students excited? And that's typically why they became counselors in the first place. When I talk with them and rewind the clock, whether they're 25 or 65, it comes back to helping other people, helping students. And with Loper, we just wanted to make something that counselors could be really excited in sharing with their students. Students would be excited in using. And I think we've done a pretty good job with it so far.
Okay, you said so many good things. I want to unpack that. Let's start with like the student side. So you said something in the beginning about your concentration being on engagement versus depth, or like that was kind of your original game plan of like when you went in, because there is so much depth to this process. Like the college search process is overwhelming. It's overwhelming to a counselor to need to have all that information in our mind, or it's like a myth that we feel like we need to have every single answer for every single student. Like, no, let's sit down and discover it together. But students feel like that too. Like, how am I ever going to learn about anything? I just know the top 3 colleges in my state, and that's what I know. And so tell us a little bit about like your thought process behind engaging students in a different way than just a website where they're searching for colleges.
Yeah. And I think it's in many ways that engagement can end up leading to depth. But if you start with
Exactly.
this sense that it's okay, you need to know everything about all colleges, I think our counselors sometimes feel, and that's just impossible. That's you're human. You can't know everything about every single college in the US. You shouldn't. It's probably a waste of your time as a counselor
Right.
if you do. Maybe as an IEC, you can expand to more, but even then I'd say I'm shocked if you'd actually think every single college you need to know that much about. And that's where the technology can come in. And on that engagement side for students and counselors, if you can take that first step, and as I think about our app and what is different about it instead of going on to a traditional college search website, very easy to use your traditional website in the sense that it might be 8 to 10 filters, high level on your preferences, but then it spits out a massive list. Could be 75 schools, it could be 275 schools. And on that, there's not that information on each school. It's kind of on you to go research and go further to understand why it's a fit for you outside of those really high level preferences and maybe falling into a state that you're interested in. And it's still really overwhelming. It's like, okay, now I see this school. How do I even approach researching it? With Loper, we'll onboard students in a chat style interface. We think that's something that's very native for students, just in terms of how many different messaging apps are out there. They're comfortable. They're flying. It always shocks me to watch students on board. It's like, oh my gosh, I made this app and you're going way faster through it and
Right.
understand it better than
Right.
I do. And then we actually just drop them into what we call swipes within Explore mode. And we have students swiping right and left on what they're most interested in. And that can be an academic major. It can be something as simple as, I want to study in a sunny place. And it's that type of carefree exploration where it's just right, left. We have a couple different styles of ranking prompts. And okay, there might be multiple choice questions. What are you most nervous about in college? And as you go through, you may not realize you've answered 20 or 30 questions that can really help technology narrow down the universe. And that's where, with counselors, I could give you these 30 preferences from a student. It's so hard if you were in live time in the conversation to rack your brain and say, okay, here's not just one school, here's a list of 10, 12 schools that actually fit those preferences. you're a superhuman if you can do that. And counselors in many ways are superhumans in
But some
different
of them are
senses.
so specific, like you're saying, like, I
It,
want it to be sunny. It's like, well, that probably
it,
didn't come up in a conversation with me as a counselor because I'm thinking through those big topics right off the
exa-
bat.
exactly. And it's so hard. And then of course there's contradictory preferences because we're talking about high school students. And
Right.
one of my favorite ones is, I want to study at a medium-sized school, but I want a school that has 20,000 to 40,000 kids. It's like, okay, well, hold on.
Right. Or they
Those
just don't understand like what they
and
have no capacity for what those sizes are, what they mean, because they've never either visited a school. I mean, we have all
yeah.
sorts of students, maybe who have limited access to things like their parents didn't go to college, they haven't toured anywhere. Like this gives them some framework, I guess, to think about.
Absolutely. And we try and explain as they go and contextualize every single prompt, as we call it, that they're swiping on has a one pager, more interactive than a one pager, but fast facts on the back of it where students can read about it. If they've never heard a topic, if you don't know what an affinity group is on campus, you can actually read about what that is and learn, okay, this is something that I'm interested in potentially joining. And college is an experiential good that it's higher ed marketing to students who have never experienced it. So it's this really weird paradox in some ways. And
And there's
and
a lot of
that's
hidden language in it. And I love
so
that
much hidden language.
you're swiping and like it has little blurbs where, like you said, you can,
Yeah.
that affinity group, that feels like, what the heck is that? Like they have no idea, as they should not. They've never been there, they've never experienced it, but you give them moments where they can stop what they're doing and read about what that is and see if it's important to them.
And that's where it's really fun for us to bring the counselor back into the process and can definitely talk about different ways that we've seen counselors have success in using Loper in the classroom, outside the classroom. But as a counselor, one, you may never have that conversation with a student separately about what is an affinity group. But with Loper, you have technology in our matching algorithm delivering best fit schools to students. We make that moment fun. We try and make a match feel really special on the app. Pictures, media gallery, actually personalize why we match the student with that school so they can read it. So it's not just this mystery of, okay, there's a list of 75 schools. How the heck did they appear and show up? We go one at a time there. But then for a counselor, you can actually have students coming to you. And it's my favorite stories that I hear are, hey, I just found out about blank school. I love it. I'd love to learn more. And then you as a counselor get to have that one-on-one conversation. But similarly with something like an affinity group, maybe, hey, I learned about this affinity group. I'm really interested. I think this sounds awesome. I'd love to join one. And now you get to have this really rich, specific conversation that in way too many contexts is impossible for counselors to get to otherwise because of the nature of their job.
Right. And we all know that we say the same thing 100 times. I mean, more than 100 times in those meetings because we're just trying to get through a lot of information. So I've always thought I love getting all the big information out in like a large group setting and then having those individual conversations with parents and students. But this is taking it to another level, like even more individualized, personalized conversations because they've come in having done some research already. And I'll say this is hard to explain on a podcast, but off air, I have looked at this app and it is really engaging. It's really cool. Kind of what you're saying, like the swipe, those things are so native to our students now that it's really easy to use. Will you talk a little bit about gamifying the college search situation? Because I mean, I'm very motivated by gamification. I don't know if our counselors have heard that term before. They probably have engaged with it and maybe don't even know it has a name. But that is something that you have thought about as you've been trying to engage students in this college process. So will you tell us about how you do that with Loper?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think in some ways for gamification, it can be overused in many contexts.
When
I,
do you see it overused? Like too many badges, too many like level
Yeah,
up kind of thing, like
and
corny things?
I think there's corny things there. We will talk about it sometimes as pandering to the students, and I am sure at different points when we look back as Loper's evolved, and we're always trying to improve the product. There are times where it's like, okay, that was silly, that was stupid. We need to take that off the app and try again. And I think like too many badges can be a good situation, but I generally bucket into when it's our team as non-high school students trying to think that we are high school students, or the second we're like, oh, this is really cool for high schoolers and it's just us saying it and we haven't talked to a high schooler, that's like alarm bells need to be ringing
Right,
somewhere
right. When the
because
adults think it's cool, the kids probably don't.
exactly. And I think that overstimulation is the other piece too, where it's like not everything needs an animation and buttons flashing, and gamification doesn't need to be, I guess, flash is another way to put it, but it comes back to engagement. I know I'm gonna probably say that word 50 more times
But
on
intentional
this podcast.
engagement versus flashy. I like that. I like the differentiation there. It's like it doesn't have to be fireworks and some big show or something. It's the right stuff in front of students to keep them
And
excited about the process and not overwhelmed.
then I'll go to the what's probably a misquoted stat out there about high school students' attention span, and it's 6 seconds now. I think I really push against that. I don't think high schoolers have 6 second attention spans, but you probably have 6 seconds to capture their attention. And
Mm.
that's where, but man, oh man, if you ever seen a high school student on their phone, if you ever seen me on their phone, trust me, I got longer than 6 second attention span. I can be scrolling for minutes, hours, like, oh my
Uh-huh.
gosh, it's 2 p.m. now. I thought it was noon. And so
Right.
high school students can really focus and they can really engage. And with college, the fun piece is we have the head start in that many of them are already, some are college obsessed, which I think can be very unhealthy. Many are college focused. And then there's a whole nother population that I think really wants to engage, but just has no idea where to start. And so
Yes.
that's where with gamification, students are swiping right and left. We have BuzzFeed style quizzes for anyone who rewinds the clock and remember those 4 panel quizzes. That's where students do get badges. Hopefully not too many. Hopefully not too
Yeah,
many. They're
just
right.
I didn't
Yeah.
know if like that was where we were
No,
going with
no, no.
that.
I always see, trust me, we've had times where we were trying to put a badge on everything. And it's like, wait a second. I just went through the app. I got 117 badges and I don't even know what these badges do. What do they mean?
I love those like buckets of students, like the ones who are, I mean, I don't love when they're obsessed with it, but those exist. And then the ones who are interested and you already kind of have their attention. And then the ones that would be interested if they had the right information in front of them. So, like, where are we as counselors missing those students? How do we capture them? And how do we capture them earlier? Because like a slow and steady drip of this information, I would think would be most beneficial to them, not fall of their senior year when they're kind of panicking of what am I going to do next? What am I going to do with my life?
Definitely. I think one thing I'll lead in with on the Loper front directly is I think Loper is in many ways best suited for juniors, like right when you're starting the traditional college process at your school. And, I know it can vary, but we'll just call it January 1st of your junior year. Seniors have hopefully all applied. It's January 1st. Okay, time to focus on juniors. Really great at the front end of the college process. But what we've learned with counselors is many schools, junior and senior year, you have a plan. You have a plan that works well. And if your plan is working, you do not need to mess up your plan. If you want something new and to engage students, definitely introduce Loper junior year. It's a great resource. But what we found is a lot of those schools, especially I will say schools that have more well-resourced, more counselors, and they're able to really run that robust process, is sophomore year is a gap. And it's how do we just get in sophomore year is more important, just get students excited. So if you're wondering, I have this process, where would I fit in Loper? Sophomore year. That's
Well,
my
and I
push.
always joke sophomore year is like the lost year. It's like we forget
Yeah.
about those students because they're transitioning from middle school into ninth grade. Then that junior year starts that intense search process about whatever is next, whether it's college or work or military or whatever. But sophomore year is kind of just like this island where they're like, maybe 2 year college, maybe they have no idea.
They have no
And we
idea.
forget about
And
them.
so that's the big push in the starting earlier. Like if I think if there's one message I would hammer home is Loper with sophomores, a great way, risk free in many ways, in the sense of it's one of those benefits of a mobile app where as a counselor you just kind of let them run. It's going to be contained, and then you can always, if a student ends up, we think we do a good job, but if you end up meeting with them junior year, you can always bring them back if there is a little bit of a direction. Or the fun thing with sophomores is sometimes reality does not match their imagination where they are. And
Totally.
I wish I could say that students who didn't have a 4.0, weren't entering 4.0 for their GPA. A simple example, if you got a 2.5 and you tell a Loper that you have a 4.0, we're going to match you with different schools. So it can be nice for counselors to bring them back.
But I love starting that conversation earlier because I can't tell you how many kids get to the more serious part of the process and they say, "Why didn't anyone tell me my GPA needed to be higher?" And it's like, wait, we've been telling you that
Oh,
for a
yeah,
while.
that's my
But if they
favorite
can
one
get
from
that like
counselors. Yeah.
reality check a little bit earlier, then they can set goals. Then they can say, "This is what I want to achieve." Oh, I didn't realize, and they experience that for themselves. Like it's way different than their parents telling them that at the dinner table. And then like counselors are the next level of intervention. They listen to us a little bit more than their parents, but something that they get to discover on their own, that's huge.
Yeah. And that's where to return back with your question on cadence, I think you're right to call out freshman year. And again, this is coming from someone who hasn't been a counselor and having these conversations, but as I see them, it's let's just get students locked in on that transition to high school. In many ways, it is middle school to high school is a big jump.
It is.
It's hard for me to even go back and rewind the clock to imagine. But it's about having that goal in mind, and whether it's freshman year and setting that goal for students, and I think for some students who fit in those buckets, we'll just say college, apprehensive, or not really sure where to start, probably don't have the language to express where to start and what they're thinking about. Building excitement, whether that's freshman year or sophomore year, and getting that goal in mind of this
Mhm.
is where you can go and being
Exactly.
aspirational, I
You
think
don't
is
have to
great.
decide now, but these are your options. And high level, here are some different pathways you can
And
take.
and I'm glad you said here are your options and different pathways, because I think sometimes the goal in mind has been very incorrectly framed as the most selective school that you can get into, or that there's a goal in mind, but by the way, that goal is limited to this bucket of 50 schools, and good luck if you're not in those 50 schools
Mhm.
because life is over. And it's just the most frustrating message to see high school students get again and again and again.
And it's
And
like,
it's
where did I'm gonna say they come up with it. I had that
yeah,
too when I was in high school. Like, why did I think that? I just made up these expectations in my own mind.
yeah, you're not listening to your counselor is probably
I
part
guess
of what
no, I didn't really have someone. They just kinda came in and said, "Pick a
yeah.
college." I don't know.
Yeah, and it's just you get it. It's sometimes it can be parents, sometimes it can be friends. Way too much just coming from the internet, and I will poke fun at the rankings lists that are out there, and they're showing up as the first, second, third result on Google, and as a student,
Right.
it's like okay, rankings. I can make this
You're right, that's where they came from.
It's a one size fits all system, which is really easy for our brains to wrap our heads around, but it's not the right way to think about it. And not only there's so many other colleges, but a big exciting development for us was Loper is there are really viable and increasingly accessible non-four-year college options. Community college, two-year college has always been there, still need to be spotlighted better, I think, by community, and
And
especially
those are in
differentiate
your app too, the 2 year?
those. So two-year colleges, that's the big jump here. Two-year colleges we're bringing into the app this year, but as well, non-degree pathways. Whether that's trade school, whether that's service-based learning programs, and I'll shout out a program we've been thrilled to work with, which is called Lead for America. They have 40 different sites for civic service programs. Topeka, Kansas, get paid for your working with local government, Topeka, Kansas. So many of those students end up going
Yeah.
back to four-year college afterwards. Some of those just see it as a direct path to a workforce and continue to progress in their careers. Those opportunities, one, as a counselor, if you're supposed to also know everything about those opportunities, good luck. But
Yeah.
two, it's just they've never really had a good way to be evaluated side by side for a student.
Mhm.
And there's definitely going to be a lot of work that we need to do to improve that comparison for students this year. But really to be able to look and say, okay, this is me, my situation, my interest. This is what four-year college at a high level sense can look like in some good fit colleges. But then here are options B through E that all can actually be viable for me. And military, I think, is still certainly viable for many students, but I think in many ways it's been college or military. It needs to be college or military or what else?
Mhm.
And that's
And
something that
we're
we're
saying that, so that's cool that that's gonna be a focus of the app too, that, like, it's for all students, and I love both sides of the equation of the exposure to the searching when they think, "That's not for me," but then also filling it out and, like, "I thought my pathway was gonna be college, 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 but there are other pathways to get there too." So, you're saying the messaging that we are already saying to students.
I always love to hear that from counselors because that's the goal. In many ways, it's an extension to come back to that original question on technology and counselors. Sometimes I hear, well, are you trying to replace counselors? And I always laugh in many ways when I get that question. One,
We are
uh,
irreplaceable.
irreplaceable. I love it. Truly, though, I laugh in that response, but 425 to 1 national student to counselor ratio, you're telling me that we need to replace counselors at that level. It really just doesn't make sense if you start to look at the numbers, but it's an extension. And it's good when we're echoing messages from counselors because there's this funny thing that happens with students in technology where you read it on net. Sorry, counselor, sometimes students won't listen to you for no matter how many times you say it, then they read it, they see it on an app, and it's like, oh, I just learned this. sometimes you got to bite your tongue and be like, oh,
Right.
that's so great. I'm happy for you. So
Happy you
forget
learned it
about
or heard
the,
it from somewhere.
yeah, forget about the 10 different presentations we've given you over the
Right.
last 2
And
years.
I'm sure that's how parents feel too when then they sit in the meeting and the counselor says it and they're like, well, yeah, that's what
Yeah.
we just talked about.
Well, sometimes even that's the, excited, probably a little bit longer term for us and thinking about how to engage parents in this process. But sometimes we've had parents use our app, and I even say for counselors, encourage parents to talk about the app with their students. Even if they want to download and use it themselves, it's going to be, and kind of put themselves in their student's head, another great resource. But we'll have counselors say, parents, we've told parents this message 20 times, and
Right.
then they find out about it elsewhere, or they use Loper, their student used Loper, and they're asking us about it. And it's not just the students who aren't always great listeners. The adults in the room have plenty of room for improvement as well.
Totally. Well, I'll say we talked about this before off air, but that this app is really student driven, which I love because I think students should be driving this process and not as much counselor driven. Like there's not a counselor interface side. And I'm telling listeners this because you're not trying to add something else on a counselor's plate. I think you had a counselor portal before and it just wasn't being
Yeah,
used, which I was like, yeah, that makes sense. We have so many portals to log into. What's one more? It's kind of cool that the students are driving this process. So I'd encourage counselors to go just download the app and, like you said, put yourself in the shoes of students, or you go back to high school and fill it out and feel what that feels like to swipe, to select, to learn about different groups and different things on campuses and kind of choose your own adventure as if you were a student. I think that could be a cool opportunity for a counselor.
absolutely. And I'm glad that you brought that up, because this is one of the big learning lessons for us over the past few years, where it's counselors do not need another product. You have your core CCR software. You probably have 10 other portals that you've got to log into at one point or another in a day, in a
Things
given
that
week.
people above you are making you do.
No,
So
always
some
the
initiative.
most productive pieces of technology, I'm sure. We had a portal and counselors found it effective, but it's, hey, I'm logging in this once or twice a year, once or twice a semester. It's hard to integrate it in my process.
Yeah.
And what I do want to make clear is students can absolutely share out their school list, their interests to counselors on that one-to-one basis. We always encourage, hey, in that meeting, have them pull out their phone and actually show you their list on Loper and what they
Yeah.
said interest you. We do know that some more and more buildings have no phone policies. So if there aren't room for exceptions, they can always share it ahead of time. And then even there, it's something that we've been increasingly pleased with, I'd say, is that students don't necessarily need, counselors don't necessarily need to pull out their phone or show that formatted list with every single interest in school on there, because it's that engagement that matters most. And then students are actually coming without that reference point. They're telling
Because they've
counselors
actually learned something.
they've actually learned something. They're telling counselors the most important thing. And now it's more conversation and that human connection that still just gets lost. But again, where I think counselor secret sauce is, and it's just a conversation. And
Yeah.
it's not even us reading a document or looking at a phone. It's just talk to me after you've gone through using Loper, whether it's for 5 minutes or you've been using it 5 weeks straight. Tell me what you learned. Tell me what you're interested in. And that's what we need to focus more on, not getting your 16th web dashboard that you need
Right,
to
right.
spend a few minutes on.
And I love that you said it's counselor secret sauce is like the relationship piece. That is why counselors are in this. They want to have those rich conversations with students and feel like the conversations are helping a student grow and learn and change, and that those conversations are meaningful and memorable. And this feels like a puzzle piece to go into that to help facilitate that without like extra stuff. It's like we have enough extra stuff.
Less extra stuff in 2025, maybe a good
Yes,
motto.
yes. Well, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you wanted to add? I know we touched on a little bit like AI and technology and gamification and the college search in general over the years of high school. Is there anything else that we didn't talk about that you think would be helpful?
I think we covered so much. Nothing really coming to mind other than the repeat message, which I've said a few times, of download and check out the app. We're really proud of where it is. I guarantee by the time this comes out, we'll have some new feature. We'll be testing something else out on the app. But Loper has 4.8 stars in the App Store for a reason. We're available on iOS and Android. Use this on iPads. You can use this on Chromebooks too. We do think that phone experience is the best. And I guess the last piece is there will be more web resources coming forward. I knew there was something that as I started talking, I'd forget. There are more web resources coming out, resources for, and this is where counselors do come back in, for students and for counselors, doing something really cool, we think, with school guides and that authentic student experience. We're releasing some schools over the next few months, kind of in this pilot batch. And when we spoke with counselors in this process of sunsetting the portal, that was an area that jumped out to us where it was, okay, you've now gotten me to, there's a school that I'm interested in. Oh, there's a student as a counselor. How do I dive really deep? It's like, oh, you still as a counselor need to spend time on Google and going through a website. You're more adept than students at navigating Google and a website, but that's still a painful and not a very enjoyable process. How can we get content-rich, authentic information accessible on a web? Will also work its way back into the mobile app too, that can give you that fun 2-minute crash course on a school that you want to share with your students too. So that's the other piece as well. There are more resources coming. No more logins, more resources coming though.
Great. And I have said this in the intro, but this is a free app. This is like, download it. You're not going to have to pay for anything. So test it out, see if you like it, make it available to your students if it's something that you feel like could enhance your conversations with your students. So Sam, thank you for being here. I think this was a great conversation about searching for colleges and a resource that's out there that'll help counselors. So thank you.
Amazing. Thanks so much for having me, Lauren. I really enjoyed it.
As this episode was college related, I want to direct you to some more college resources for you as a high school counselor. If you go to www.counselorclick.com/college playlist, you'll find a handful of other curated college episodes of high school counseling conversations for you. Some of my favorites on this playlist include how to host a college application day, running senior meetings like a boss, and supporting and empowering first-generation students. I think today's conversation fits in really well with all the ways that you're already serving your students and then the ways that you're continually trying to improve what that looks like. Definitely head over and go download the Loper app and play around with it. Of course, I'll link it in the show notes so you can just bop over there since you're on your phone already. You're going to love how you interact with it, and it's going to be a no-brainer that you would incorporate this into your college conversations with your students. I'll see you next week for another episode. Thanks for listening to today's episode of High School Counseling Conversations. All the links I talked about today can be found in the show notes and also at counselorclick.com/podcast. Be sure to hit follow wherever you listen to your podcast so that you never miss a new episode. Connect with me over on Instagram. Feel free to send me a DM at counselorclick. That's CLIQUE. I'll see you next week.